Lesson 31, Creating Workbooks. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at a very common problem. We have a large data set and we want to split that report into multiple workbooks, one for each department. We're going to use object variables to track the original workbook and one object variable to track the new workbook, each new workbook. So this time we'll be reusing that object variable for the new workbook as we create each individual workbook. We'll take a look at saving and closing the new workbooks. Let's get started. Okay, so I have here a huge report. Let's take a look and down. 981 rows, several different cost centers in column A and B. The report is sorted by cost center. That's going to make our life a little bit easier here today. The report is wide. It goes out for 12 months, lists all the different accounts. And I need to send these, it's budget time, I need to send these out to each individual cost center, but I don't want each cost center just to get the data for all the other cost centers. I just want them to get the data for their cost center. So let's take a look at how to create this via a macro that'll loop through, and basically every time we find a new cost center, it'll take all of those records and move them to a new workbook. I'm going to use 4 object variables in this lesson. Now in the last lesson we used an object variable for 2 worksheets. I'm adding 2 new object variables that are workbook object variables. WBO stands for the original workbook, that's the workbook where all the data is, and then WBN, that stands for the individual department workbooks that we're going to create. And I'm going to create one at a time, so I get to reuse that variable over and over and over again. Well, we're going to make a huge assumption here that they're going to run the macro from the worksheet where the data is. So we'll say set WBO equal to active workbook. Active workbook, that's a code word. Reserved word, that means the workbook that's currently active. And then set WSO, the original workbook, equal to WBO.worksheets1. Or actually what we could do is just use active sheet, another reserved word for us that will solve that problem. Okay, so I'm going to want to loop through all the records here, and so we set up final row equals WSO.cells rows.count, comma 1, end XLUp.row. And I'm going to set up a couple of variables to start with. I'm going to call it last department is equal to cells 2, comma 1. That'll record the number of the last department, and start row is equal to 2. Now you'll see how we use these throughout the loop. So we're ready to roll here. We're going to use our loop. We're going to use for I equals 2 to final row. And I'll say this department is equal to WSO.cells I, comma 1. And we'll check to see if this department is the same as the last department. If this department equals last department, then, well, we don't need to do anything. We want to just keep going. So I'm going to put a comma here and do nothing else. All right, now this is where we have a new department starting. Copy all of the previous rows to a new workbook. And so we're going to set up a couple of variables here on the fly. We have start row, and I want to then have last row is equal to I minus 1. All right, so now I know that I want to take everything from start row to last row and copy that to a new workbook. The row count is equal to the last row minus the start row plus 1. That way I know how many rows I want to copy. Okay, at this point we need to create a new workbook. And it's a little bit frustrating. If we just did workbooks.add, we're going to get the number of sheets that that person's computer has as the default number of sheets. I really want to create a workbook that has just a single worksheet. So we do workbooks.add, and then in the template there's a great code word here. I don't know how you're supposed to remember this. It's just something you have to remember. XLWBAT worksheet. XLWBAT worksheet. and you see that gets capitalized. That's the template name to create a single worksheet in a new workbook. And of course, the name of that workbook is going to be different every single time because you're going to get book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, and so on. So I'm going to use the same trick that I used in the last lesson. That's assigning this new workbook directly to an object variable. So we say set WBN, that's workbook new, equal to workbooks.add. And remember what we have to do. We have to add parentheses when we're directly setting the result of this command to an object variable. All right, so we have a new workbook. Of course, that workbook is going to have one worksheet. So I can say set WSN, the new worksheet, equal to WBN.worksheets, parentheses 1. There's only one worksheet there, but we want to have a nice object variable to handle that new information. Okay, so let's set up the headings for the report. So we can say WSN.cells 1, 1 .value equals budget report. I want to change the font of that title. Okay. I want to copy the headings from the original data. And actually, the cost center and department would make a great subtitle in row 2. So WSN.cells 2, 1 .value is equal to, all right, and I want to show both the cost center and the department name. Well, luckily I have this variable up here called start row, and so that's going to help me to build this. I can use the variable called last department, and then an ampersand, in quotes, a space, a dash, a space, and another ampersand, and then we're going to use the value from the original worksheet. The original worksheet is WSO.cells start row, comma 2. All right, so that gets us in row 2. Now we'll have the cost center number and the department name. Row 3 is going to be blank. Row 4 is where we want to copy the headings over. So I say WSO, the original workbook, range, and we start in C1. Out 2, let's take a look here. I'll press end and write C1 to Q1 dot copy, and the destination is the new workbook. So WSN dot cells row 4, 1. All right. Now we're going to copy a large rectangular range of data. And in the past, we've talked about ways to refer to cells, the range command and the cells command. There's an unusual version of the range command where you actually specify the top left cell and the bottom right cell. And that version is the one that really helps in this particular manner, because it's possible here to specify cell 1 and cell 2 as using the cells command. So let me show you. We're going to say WSO, the original workbook, range, and we're going to start in WSO.cells start row, comma 3, and we're going to go out to WSO.cells last row, comma Q. What is Q? What is Q? Well, here's a way to find out what Q is. If we go home and start to go to the right, you'll see here it counts the number of columns. And so I'll press end right. Once you get beyond 10 or so, it gives you a tooltip. So Q is column 17. So I know that I want to go from last row 17. So that finishes the cells command, and then we'll finish the range command. Dot copy, and the destination is WSN, the new workbook, dot cells, next row, comma 1. All right. Next row. I haven't defined next row yet, so back here after I set up the headings, we could define next row as is equal to 4. Actually, you know, that now I think about it, since we're always copying to a brand new workbook, of course we're always going to copy to 4. We really don't even need to use that variable. We can just say that we always want to go to row 5. Headings in row 4, data in row 5. All right, so trying to add a variable on the fly there that I really did not need to set up. All right, so at this point, we're going to have the first report. It's going to look good. It's going to have titles in row 1 and row 2, headings in row 4, the data in row 5, and we're basically done with that new report. But I need to save it, and we have to figure out how to save this file, what name to give it. Well, a great name to use would be the department name, and so I can create a little variable here called file name is equal to last department ampersand dot xlsx. All right, so that's a great file name. Where do we want to save it? Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. So what we could do is say file path is equal to the original workbook, wbo dot path ampersand application dot path separator. Path separator. Now in Windows, of course, that's a backslash, but in case someone happens to be running this on an old version of Excel in the Mac environment, path separator will use the proper path separator for Mac Excel. All right, so now we know where we're going to save this to. We're going to say wbn.saveas. wbn.saveas. File name is equal to fp ampersand fn. That should do it. Now that we've saved the workbook, we'll be wbn.close and save changes is equal to false because we just saved the changes. All right. So now at this point we've closed the new workbook. We're back in Excel and we're ready to start rolling again. Of course, we need to set up a couple of variables so that way the loop will continue to work. Last department is equal to this department, and start row is now equal to I. All right, and if. So that chunk of code right there is the chunk of code that is going to handle creating a brand new workbook, setting up the headings, copying the data from this department over to the new workbook. It saves it with a new name and then saves the changes. At that point, we can now go through next I. Now, this code is almost perfect except for it's not going to create the workbook for the very last cost center. So I'm actually going to say that my final row is one more than it really is, plus 1. That way we'll have a value of 0, and that will force Excel to save out the very last cost center. Now, a couple of pain points here that I'm not sure that they're going to work. In particular, I want to take a look at when I create this first workbook. I also want to take a look at when we save the workbook that it actually gets created. So rather than step through the code, I'm going to set a couple of breakpoints here. The first breakpoint will be after we add the workbook. I want to see that I'm in a new section of code. I want to take a look at the workbook right before I save as. So I set a couple of breakpoints there that I'm going to use in my first time through the macro. Once I see those lines of code are working, then I'm going to get rid of those breakpoints and let the macro run the rest of the way. All right, well, let's save this workbook. Save as. We'll go to the post folder, and this is lesson 31. Click OK. All right, and I'm going to let this start to run. So we just click somewhere inside the macro, click the Run button, and it starts running. And you can see that we've now created a new workbook. That's great. I want to watch as we set up the headings, the budget report. Nice font size. Oh, perfect. It was able to bring over the name of this department, copied my headings over, and the headings start correctly. So now we should see that we copy everything from start row to last row. Let's just do a quick test here. I'm going to look at the immediate pane. So Control G to see the immediate pane. We'll print start row is 2. Print last row 47. All right, looks good. Let's copy that piece over. So I'll run one line of code with F8. Oh, and we get an application error. So we'll debug and we'll see what's going on. WSL start row, WSL's last row. All of that looks good. We're going to copy to WSN cells next row. Oh, there we go. Next row isn't defined, so it doesn't know what that is. We want to go to row 5, column 1. So we had a bug there, but you see we can still recover from that bug. We're able to go ahead and run that line of code again with F8. Oh, beautiful. Let's take a look here. Everything ends up all the way from account 6,000 down to 9,000. Now I'm going to jot a note here. Some things we might want to think about doing. The column B probably needs to be auto-fit. So I'm running that down. These are things we want to tweak before we actually send this out to be used. All right, but we want to keep going here. So our file name and file path, let's see what that's going to look like. Print FP and FN. So we have C users, public documents, live lessons, VBA, post. Looks beautiful. All right, so here's the save as command. Let's see how that works. We should see up here that we have a new file name, 1001.xlsx. Excellent. This is really good. So just a few problems here. wbn.close should save our new workbook. And we're back in the original workbook. Last department and start row. All right, well, I'm feeling pretty good about this whole thing. I'm going to go ahead and turn off those breakpoints and let the macro continue to run. Continue. And we can kind of watch it being created over there, the various departments. We're back in our original workbook. We should be able to go out and look in the file folder. So we'll go to public here, public documents, live lessons VBA, and if we look at the recent files, there they're all created. We just created 20 new files, and you can see that they were all created over the course of 1 minute. We're now ready to send these out to the individual folks. And the beautiful thing about this is this macro will work for no matter how many different departments we had. So this simple data set with 1,000 rows, if we had had 1,000,000 rows and 100 different departments, this exact same macro would have worked perfectly and created all of those workbooks very, very quickly. So the point from this lesson is being able to create a new workbook using workbooks.add. I always have a couple of variables here, 2 workbook variables, one to keep track of the original workbook and one to keep track of the new workbook, 2 worksheet variables, one for the original worksheet and one for the new worksheet. And notice that we're reusing WBN and WSN as we go through the loop each time. It's creating WBN all over again, and we just keep reusing that object variable, taking new data out there and ending up with many, many, many different reports, each customized for the individual department. Well, in the next lessons, I want to talk about how to do the opposite, how to take this data from many different worksheets in different workbooks and combine them all into a single workbook. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at how to get a list of all files in a folder, and then the following lesson, how to combine all those back together into a single workbook. Thanks for watching this lesson. I hope you found this helpful.
Looking to advance your career by acquiring new skills? Tired of expensive off-site training programs? Wish you could learn from the best instructors in the industry? Look no further than live lessons. Self-paced, personal video instruction by the world's leading technology publishers. Each live lesson comes with a DVD featuring 3 to 4 hours of instructor-led classroom training, sample program code that allows you to work along with your personal instructor, and an example-rich study guide. Live lessons allow you to watch the entire course from start to finish, or navigate directly to any of the individual lessons. You'll literally watch over the shoulder of your instructor as he shows you how to build state-of-the-art applications. Live lessons, the power of the world's leading technology experts at your fingertips. To learn more, visit mylivelessons.com today.